I got my old beat up set of floats that have been in the salt water for 20 years. They were sitting out here for 2 years. I got those all apart in about 2 hours. Now I'm working on my new set of floats that have been strictly in fresh water. Of course, they've been sitting out in the grass for probably 10 or 12 years over Catherine had them, and then a couple of years here since I've had them. And it's taken me over 2 hours just to get the water rudders off of here. I was able to get the bolts out of the top. It took all I could do with a 1/4-inch dry ratchet to get those to turn, but I got them out of there. I got the nuts off the ones on the bottom, but I couldn't get the bolts out. I couldn't get them to turn. I was soaking them in PB Blaster. I started soaking them this morning, and before I ever started working on it, and then after I started trying to get them, I soaked them again. So I just stopped for an hour or so and went, took the dogs out for a walk, and came back and started on them again, and I couldn't get them to turn. I got my rivet gun out with a rivet set, a blind set on it, or just a hammer on the end of it there, and tried hammering on them, and I get them move a little bit, but not very much, so got them up a little bit, put some PB Blaster on them, knocked them back down again. I went and got my impact driver and finally got them to start to turn, and they started walking out a little bit. Put some more PB Blaster on them and got my air hammer and knocked them back down in there again. And anyway, we got them out finally, those bottom ones. They're in worse shape than the ones on the old floats there. So anyway, it took me longer just to get the water rudders off of there than it did to take the whole floats apart on the old set. I got these new floats pretty much broke down. I just have to knock the bolts out of those spreader bars to get them apart completely. But everything else is off. I got to say, I was pretty disappointed with that. I had to fight every one of those nuts and bolts. Every one of them had to be turned off hard. Every one of the bolts had to be driven out. I wound up going and getting my impact wrench again to loosen those up, the bolts up through the fittings. And I got my rivet gun with the rivet set on it to drive them all out. And I had to use the 4X rivet gun. The 2X rivet gun wouldn't do it. Almost every one of them I had to drive out. I guess the water rudders were kind of a prophecy as to what the rest of it was going to be like. But they're all off there now. I'll get all these parts and pieces picked up and get them out of the way before I take those spreader bars off there and tip those floats over. I've got a lot of bolts and nuts and parts and pieces there. Most of the pieces, all the aluminum pieces and stuff, are all in pretty good shape. They're not hurt any, just every one of those bolts. I don't think there's one bolt or nut in that thing that's reusable. So a set of float used only in fresh water and not taken apart and maintained was a lot harder to take apart than a set of floats that was used in salt water. There's a lot to say for putting the peralketone and stuff on those pieces, I guess. Hey, well, I'll get to it. I got to tag these parts and start getting them put away, put out of the way, and then we'll finish up here. Well, those floats are apart. That didn't go as bad as I was afraid it would. Those lower attachments on there were actually in pretty good shape. The bolts are in pretty good shape, better than the ones up above. The bolts all just tapped out with some gentle taps, and they came right out. So that was good. That was a lot better than the rest of it was. Now I can tip those floats over and do a good inspection on the bottom, do any repairs that I need to on the bottoms. Starting to sprinkle a little bit, so I guess I better put the camera away. We got these floats turned over and doing a little inspection on them. This is the right float here, and it's got some scratches in it and some dents in it, or it must have run up over some rocks or something, but otherwise it's not in too bad a shape. Now this left float has a patch here in the front, and this is what I was concerned with, because they had this all gummed up here on the outside with some kind of gookumpucky there. I don't know what it was. It peeled right off. It was loose and it looked terrible. Looking at the patch, it doesn't look quite so bad. It come down hard on something and punctured it right there, and then there's a big scrape back down the float where something hit pretty hard. I don't know exactly what I'm going to do with that. I have to look at it a little closer and see. It should have been sealed from the inside and not try to be sealed from the outside there, but we may have to redo that. I don't know. I'll have to take a look at it and see, but that's not too bad. Otherwise, the bottoms of them don't look too bad until I get back down here on the keel on the aft end of this float, and I've got corrosion right there in that section of the keel. Yeah, it looks like some corrosion right there too. Probably from just sitting on the ground, I suppose, but That's not too good. I'll have to do something with that before it infects the rest of it. These floats, so they've had something in them in the back end of them too, inside that's beat up in there. You can see all these dents in here in the bottom of the float where something is beat on it from the inside. Same thing. Oh, I thought I saw the same thing over here on this right float, but I don't see it on it. But something was in there hammering on that pretty good. Anyway, all in all, they're not too bad a shape. A little bit of repairs on them, not near like I would have to do on that other float, on that other set of floats. So I just went over the bottoms and the sides of these floats with a brush and some soapy water, washed them off with the fresh water. I'd gone over them with a pressure washer when I first brought them out here and got most of the heavy stuff off, but that never gets everything off. There's always some residual dirt and stuff on there. And I didn't get the bottoms with the pressure washer anyway. So while I got them loose here, I scrubbed them pretty good. Now I went over and inspected those by eye and found some damage and stuff to them that needs to be taken care of. But if you want to really do a good job of inspecting something, going over it, and you go over it with some water and a rag or brush, seems like you always find more stuff when you're washing something and cleaning it up than you do by just plain inspection on it. And the only thing that covers up sin more than old dirt is new paint. So we got that old dirt off of there. Now we can take another look at things and come up with a plan for repair or repairs as necessary. On that left float, I know I've got corrosion back there on that aft keel section, so probably the first thing I'm going to do is drill out that keel section there and get ready to splice in a new section of keel. I measured that keel strip and it's about 63 thousandths, something like that. It's probably 2024. I have got some 63 thousandths 6061 T5 or T6 that I used to make my instrument panel out of. Well, it's not quite the same thing, but it'll work for repair on there. I'll make a strip there and splice in a new section of the keel on that. And then I got to look in there, and again on that left float in that aft compartment, there's something was in there that banged around pretty good and looked like something pretty heavy banging around in there. And I did find one spot in there where it penetrated the skin, so I'll have to put a patch on that. And then there's that patch on the forward section of that left float that was patched in there already, and I'm going to have to look at that and see if I need to do something with that. Then I'll clean out those float compartments and do a little bit of leak proofing on them, see if I can't seal some leaks up on them. Now you might ask how I know that there's some leaks in there. Well, one of the things I'd noticed that somebody had smeared some RTV, some silicone, on those seams on the chines on the forward sections of both floats. The only reason they would do that, especially as messy as they did, is if the floats were leaking there along those chines, or they thought they were. But these floats leak. When they're brand new, they're sealed up pretty tight, but it doesn't take very long for them to start leaking. Edo, when they put these floats together, they have to waterproof these seams. And what they do is they take some tape that's impregnated with zinc chromate paste, and that's what they put down on those seams. And it works real well to fill those seams and waterproof them for about 2 or 3 years. And then whatever the solvent is in there that keeps that zinc chromate paste soft starts drying up, and it gets brittle and it starts coming apart. And of course the flexing and everything that the floats go through when they're being used contributes to that. Those seams squeeze together more and squish more of that stuff out between them all of the time. You can see that pretty well on this step section here. This stuff that's squeezing out of there is that zinc chromate paste or tape that they use to seal those up. So that's all coming loose out of there, so that's pretty obvious that that's going to leak right there. Years ago I hung around Kenmore Seaplane Base, Kenmore Air Harbor a little bit, and I watched them repairing floats down there. Talking to the guy that was doing the float repairs on them. They were using something else to seal these floats with. They said it worked a lot better. They were using some stuff called a PRC 5200, which is a marine sealant, and it's very much like silicone, like an RTV, but it's a lot tougher than most of the RTVs that you use. And that was what they were putting their floats back together with when they were rebuilding them and repairing floats. There's a couple problems with using PRC 5200 with repairs, and one of them is similar to using anti-seize, when you're putting anti-seize on, is it has a tendency to get everywhere. It gets on your fingers, and when you touch your nose, it gets on your nose. If you scratch your forehead, it gets on your forehead. If you touch your zipper, it gets on your zipper, and you can imagine where it goes from there. And the other thing that's the problem with it is once it goes in, it's pretty much permanent. Once you put two pieces together with that, it's not coming apart without destroying the pieces. So it's a permanent solution. It's not something you want to do if something you're going to take apart and put together a bunch of times. Well, I'm going to go over these things again, now that it's clean, and do a little more inspection on it, and then start laying out the repairs.